It happens many different ways. It's uncommon, it's unusual for it to happen spontaneously, the way it did for Ramana Maharshi, for example. That's a very unusual situation. It's more typical for it to be something that is a gradual reality. However, the thing about it that is most important to recognize about meditation is that meditation is actually the experience of being aware is meditation. So you could say, and we talk about the fact that this awareness that we speak of is already the case. And so when you meditate, it's an opportunity to experience that which is already the case, the being aware of the awareness that's always present, the presence of awareness. And the idea is that it becomes familiar, and the mind, because the way you're practicing paying attention to the breath, for example, the mind slows down, the mind calms down. It becomes easier to just be this awareness. And so over time,
meditation creates the opportunity. It's a better opportunity to see it.
yeah, it's not. The key is to understand you're not. The way that it gets misunderstood is that we're doing something, that awareness is something we're doing. And that's not what meditation is. Meditation is being. It's experiencing being, not doing. And so the default state of being a body, or being a person living in a body, being a separate person from the world and other people, when you go to meditate and you sit still and you're silent, that default state begins to react to that. Because this is threatening the existence of the default state, because it depends on thinking to maintain itself. And so you're withdrawing energy and you're withdrawing attention from the thought process. And it's not that you're necessarily doing that, it's that when you're sitting there simply allowing yourself to notice what's already true, the awareness itself, and to recognize that the awareness is not moving, the awareness is not trying to accomplish anything, the awareness is not doing anything, the awareness is not rejecting anything. It's one of the reasons that I say that when you're practicing meditation, it's important to be clear that if during the practice you find yourself having a thought or coming to some judgment or evaluation about the practice, that something is not okay, am I doing it right, am I whatever it is that comes up that tries to pull your attention back into the idea that you have of who you are, to think about meditation instead of to experience it, and of course that's the practice. I'm sure those of you guys have been coming to the class consistently enough over time that you've probably noticed, if you practice meditation consistently, that it becomes easier. It becomes easier to just be there with the experience. And I'm sure you also noticed that there are people that come to the class that aren't regulars, and it's more than not, it's the case they can't make it through the class, because the person has them get up and leave, because they're so much in the experience of being the person and being the body and being the thinker of the thoughts that they sit there and feel like they're going crazy, right? Because they're not yet free from engaging with and being related to the thought process, and having the thought process give them the experience of what's going on. As I often say, that in that state of mind, you're not living in the world, you're living in your interpretation of the world. You're not being yourself, you're being the interpretation that you have of who you are. And so there you sit with the idea you have of who you are, trying to meditate. You can't help but do it that way in the beginning because you're new at this, and that's the default state. So you're trying to meditate, and you feel restless because the mind just keeps racing, and the thoughts are thoughts about what you're doing, and thinking about how long is this. You've been doing this. The thought comes up of, how much time has passed, how much longer is this going to be. You hear sounds, and your attention goes to the sound. Why is that happening? It's too noisy. That's a distraction. Or you feel something happening in your body, some pain somewhere, and that takes your attention. Or your attention goes to what happened earlier today, or your attention goes to what you're going to have for dinner. This is what they call in the East the monkey mind. They call it the monkey mind. Yeah, they say to beginners to create a place that's quiet and so forth, just to make it easier in the beginning to be able to stay in the experience. But yeah, you're right. The idea is that over time, you want to have it be that your experience is meditation, and sometimes you fall into the experience of being the person. Instead of being the person, sometimes you fall into the experience of meditation. You want to have that be something that flips, and this is why the practice, and in a lot of these practices that come from the East, in terms of a lot of the Buddhist paths of practice and understandings, a lot of these practices were developed and originated with the idea that people have to practice for years, and people have to ripen their readiness to be able to understand the truth, to be able to experience the reality of the truth. And so people aren't given the higher teachings until the guru or the teacher or the master feels that they are ready to hear it, and that they'll be able to hear it, and they'll be able to make the shift. A lot of that has to do with the culture that these things happened in and the time that these things happened in. But today it's a different matter, and the approach that we talk of here is called the direct approach. In other words, we don't start with where you are with the idea that you're going to get somewhere someday, that you're going to get to a place where you become enlightened, or you become awake, or you become aware of yourself as awareness. We start with the idea that we start at the end. We have the end be the beginning, that you are the awareness. It's already happened. You don't have to get anywhere. All you have to do is pay attention and be able to notice that most of the time you're not being the awareness. That's the process in which you begin to see that the way you're behaving, that what you're giving your energy to, what you're giving your attention to, is still coming from the idea that you're a personality, that you live in this body, that you're separate from other people, that you're separate from the world, that you live in time, and that you're not the awareness, and that you're going to become the awareness. And so through the practice of meditation, you become more able to notice and pay attention as you go through the day, as you go through your life, whether where you're coming from is that orientation, so that you see, you begin to see, and I'm sure you've been at this enough to start to see this. You begin to see, for example, when you get upset, when you get angry, you begin to see how that that way of being is coming from the idea that you're separate from other people and that you live in this body and that you're threatened, and therefore you have to react, therefore you have to protect yourself, that you have to be aggressive, that you have to withdraw yourself. You start to notice that this is the world that you're in, and this is the world of the separate self. And so as you notice this, it begins to become possible to, when you're noticing it, to let it go, to let your attention return to its natural state, to let your attention return to what they call sahaja, which is the natural state, which is the awareness, knowing itself. And that's the other thing we've talked about here, is that this whole business of trying to experience what you are, it's a trick. That's a trick that the mind will play to get you to believe that you're not what you actually are, and therefore you have to try and become it. You have to practice it. You have to do something. You have to learn more. You have to do something. You have to change somehow. And it's very important to understand that a marker, a place that is an indication that you are making progress, is when you stop trying to be what you are. Is when you accept and you recognize that the only way to be what you are is to be it. The only way to be what you are is to experience that you're it. This is what we talk about when we say you can never see it. It's not an object. You can never see it. You can never understand it. The only possibility is to be it, and you are being it, right? And if that's the case, then a sign of progress is that you stop trying to be it. You just accept that the experience you're having is the experience. Now, one way to talk about that we've talked about here in terms of non-duality is one. If you accept the idea that you're not who you think you are, if you understand it conceptually, that you're not a personality and that you're not the body, if you understand that deeply enough, then the implication is that if you're not who you think you are and you're not the body and you're not separate from anybody and you're not separate from the world, then the implication is that duality isn't the truth, because all of that is dualistic. So if you accept all that, you're accepting that duality isn't the truth, and you're beginning to recognize that non-duality is the truth, that there is no separate self, there is no objective world. This is the thing that's hard to get through your head, because your head is so thoroughly involved in the idea that there is a separate self and there is a world out there. And everybody else on the planet, most everybody else on the planet is into that reality. And even if you are not experiencing that, you still have to deal with that reality, right? So that's why they say you may not be of this world, but you are in this world, and you still have to deal with being in this world. And so that becomes a matter of skill. It becomes a matter of being skillful to be able to maintain your experience of the truth of yourself as awareness itself, and at the same time deal with life and deal with the world and deal with the challenges that are going to arise in a human life. One of the things that is helpful with that is that when you start to understand non-duality, it becomes a little easier, because you now know that even when you think you're the body, and even when you think you're the personality, and even when you're in that reality, that is still the self. That is still awareness. That's what non-duality means. There is no separate thing. There is no subject-object. So even when all along, that's what people mean when they have a direct experience of the truth of themselves. That one of the things they commonly say is, I noticed that it's always been like this. I've always been experiencing this. And that's one of the things that some people, when they actually have a direct experience of it, they can't believe it. They can't believe it. It's like, what do you mean? This is it? The experience that I've been having all along is it? And the answer to that question is yes, it is it. Because the experience you've been having all along is the awareness, right? But you've been preoccupied with playing the role. You've been preoccupied. Your attention and your energy has been occupied with maintaining the idea that you're this person. It's kind of like somebody who's acting a role in a movie or a play, and they learn the role that they're going to play in the movie or the play, and when they learn the role, they become that actor, and they no longer know who they were before they became the actor. And then at some point, they wake up and they remember the truth. And when they wake up and they remember the truth, they realize, well, I've always been who I really am. I was just confused and thinking I was the role that I was playing. That's exactly what's happening. It's exactly what's happening. Except that, if you've been acting this role out for 50 years or even 30 years, your tendency is to keep falling back into being the character. And so it takes a while to keep noticing, keep catching yourself being the character and realize that that's not the reality of who I am. That's one of the reasons why younger people don't show up here, why you don't see younger people being involved in these things, because they're so new at the role. You know what I mean? They have all their energy is invested in the role. All their energy is invested in succeeding as a person, right? Young people, that's what they're up to, succeeding as a person. They're totally down with that. And so if a young person came here, and I've seen this happen from time to time, a teenager will wander in here by mistake. And what'll happen is I can see their head turning like, what is this man talking about? Like they have no idea what the hell I'm talking about. And for them, it's like the way it registers for them is that they will come to a conclusion that whatever's going on here has nothing to do with me, has nothing to do with reality. And so they just leave and go back and keep, developing, being a good person, being a successful person. That's what you're groomed to do as a child, aren't you? You're groomed to be a successful person. When you go to school, what are you learning? Right from the very beginning, when you go to school, what are you learning, right? How to be a person, how to be a civilized person, how to be a person that follows the rules, how to be a person that understands that what matters in life is to be good at what you do, right? And to figure out who you're going to be, and then to work on being that and being good at that. I was watching an interview that Rupert Spira was doing with Ian MacKaye, the guy who from Conscious TV. And at one point they started to talk about this movie that they both had seen, right? And the movie's about a Formula One race car driver. And it's the story of this, it's a documentary actually, but it plays like a movie because this person was so famous, there was a lot of film of him in all of the situations in his life, so they could put it together and it would play like a movie, like you were actually seeing a movie of this guy's life. But it wasn't a movie, it was real. And the thing that Rupert was commenting on is that this movie was a good example of a human life in which this person aspired to be the best in the world at what he was doing. It goes back to what I was just saying about, you're being groomed to be good at something, to be successful. And so when you're in something like competitive sports or in something like Formula One racing, the goal is to win, right? The goal is to be the best. And it just so happened that he had enough natural ability that he became the best very quickly, very young. And if you look at the movie, every time he's interviewed after he wins a race, and they ask him how he feels and what he thinks, he makes these comments like, well, this makes me happy. And he talks about having these altered state experiences driving the car. And I've actually talked about that here. Remember when I have said that you can't be thinking when you're driving a car 200 miles an hour. It's not possible. And he describes having these experiences, these altered states when he's driving, and he does these miraculous things. I mean, one race, for example, he was very fast, and he would always, in the time trials, end up being in the pole position. In racing, the pole position means you're in front of all the other cars when you start, right? And in one of the races, he was in the pole position, and the race started, and his car stalled. So he ended up in 16th place at the start of the race, right? And he won the race, right? There was another time when he was in a race, it was in Brazil, which was his country, and he always wanted to win the Grand Prix in Brazil because it was his own country. And he got to the end of the race, I think it was something like 16 laps left, and his gears froze and only had 6th gear. He only had 6th gear. And so he just pushed the car as hard as he could in 6th gear, and he still won the race. So when you have somebody like this that has such incredible achievements, and then at some point he wins the World Championship Grand Prix, which is like, you know, they go to all these races around the world and you get points for how you place in the races, and then at the end of the year, who has the most points is the world champion. So he wanted to achieve that. And at one point he finally achieved that, and he was being interviewed, and they said, well, what's it like to have finally achieved this? And he said, I'm at peace. And Rupert pointed to that, and he said, it's very interesting that all of his energy was tied up in the tensions involved in pushing and pushing and trying to accomplish this. And when he accomplished it, he could finally let go and relax. And that's typical of being in the life of a person, you know what I mean? Where that's what it's all about. And then at another point, they asked him, you know, how he experienced being a famous race car driver at this point. And because he had won the world championship 3 times at that point, he was still young. And he said, well, driving race cars makes me happy, but I'm not happy as a man. That's a very interesting statement to make. And he said, well, but I'm young enough, I haven't lived even half my life yet, and so I think I still have time to discover what it is to be happy as a man. So it's a very interesting movie to watch if you're looking at it in terms of this is the human life that you're looking at, and this is somebody who is trying to sort himself out in this human life, and they go through all the trials and tribulations that he goes through racing and everything. So I highly recommend the movie. You can get it on Amazon Prime. It won a lot of awards. It's a very good movie to watch. It's very exciting to watch these races. But the key to what I'm pointing at when I talk about this movie is that it's a look at a human life and how a human life plays out in terms of being a person and trying to be successful somehow as a person. And it helps you to understand why people who are in a position in the world in which that's almost impossible. You know, if you're black and poor, right? And you can understand why people in those positions end up becoming drug addicts, because they feel blocked off in terms of experiencing being a successful human being, being a successful person, and it's just something that they can't deal with, and so they just want to escape from the experience of life. So check it out. If you get a chance to take a look at that movie, I think you'll find it very interesting. Yeah, Bob.
I saw a similar story on HBO. They were
father wanted him to be this great spiritual leader, to bring all the races together, to be like Gandhi or Jesus.
Oh.
And his mother was just this bloodthirsty person who wanted him to win and crush the opponent. But once he got all these wins, he was only happy when he played golf. He wasn't happy doing anything else in his life. And when all these crowds were around him, he felt that he lost all of his privacy. And he started enjoying scuba diving because he said, the fish don't know who I am.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of a sad story, you know. Here this guy becomes a millionaire, he becomes the greatest golfer, but he's sad, really, you know, that he doesn't have a full.
Well, isn't it true? And I can tell you that that moves you, right?
It certainly does.
Yeah, and you know why?
That side of him.
Yeah, but you know why it moves you? Because you're looking at yourself in the sense that although we don't experience the scale of a pro golfer or a famous race car driver, what's true about their lives is true about our lives too. That the life that's being given for us to lead doesn't work. That's the message. You know, that's what there is to discover. And you can discover it. It's like Paul Hederman says, the only value in what there is to learn about the way life is that it's a failure. It doesn't work. And if you get that and you're clear about that, then you open yourself up to what the possibility is, and you start to seek. You become a seeker, and that's the beginning of the discovery of the truth.